My name is Milton, and I am 62 years old. I drove 2 hours that afternoon just to see my son's face when I asked him about his brewery opening. I had seen the photos on Facebook posted by a neighbor I barely knew showing crowds of people raising glasses inside a building that my money helped construct. My heart was pounding with hope as I stood on that porch clutching a bottle of wine I had saved for this moment. But when the door opened, it was not Derek. It was Sloane, my daughter-in-law, looking at me like I was selling vacuum cleaners. She glanced at my face, then at the bottle, and said something that made my knees buckle right there on the doorstep. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to know where you are watching from today. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you have ever felt invisible to someone you loved with all your heart, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. What I am about to share took me 35 years to understand, and I hope my story helps you see something I wish I had seen sooner. Some people say that being a father is the most natural thing in the world. I suppose that is true for some men. For me, being a father meant choosing between sleep and survival every single day for more years than I care to count. Derek came into this world in 1988, a tiny screaming bundle that fit perfectly in my calloused hands. Sandra, my wife, held him first, and I remember watching her face transform into something I had never seen before. Pure love. Absolute devotion. I felt the same thing hit me like a freight train when she placed him in my arms. 2 years later, everything changed. Sandra started getting tired all the time. Not the normal tired that comes with chasing a toddler around. This was different. She would sleep for 12 hours and wake up exhausted. Her joints swelled. A rash appeared across her cheeks that would not go away no matter what cream we tried. The doctors ran tests for weeks before they finally had an answer. Lupus. Systemic lupus erythematosus, they called it, with a severity that made the specialist pause before explaining what it meant for our future. I was working at the steel mill back then, earning decent money, but nothing spectacular. The day after the diagnosis, I walked into my supervisor's office and asked for overtime. Any shift, any time, any job. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. I think he understood without me having to explain. From that day forward, I worked double shifts more often than not. The day shift ran from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. The night shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. I would come home between shifts, my clothes soaked with sweat and machine oil, and try to be a father for those precious few hours. Derek was too young to understand why Daddy was always tired. He would run to me when I walked through the door, his little arms reaching up, and I would scoop him up no matter how much my back ached. We had a routine. I would make him breakfast, whatever Sandra had set out the night before, and we would eat together at the kitchen table while the morning news played on the small television in the corner. Most days, I could not keep my eyes open long enough to finish my coffee. Derek learned early that sometimes Daddy fell asleep at the table, and that it was okay to quietly watch cartoons until Mommy woke up. He never complained. He was such a good boy. The medical bills piled up like autumn leaves in a storm. Every month brought new medications, new treatments, new specialists with their new fees. Sandra felt guilty about the cost, and I spent more energy convincing her not to apologize than I spent on anything else. She was fighting for her life. What kind of man would I be if I resented her for that? When Derek was 12, he came home from school one day with a brochure for a summer science camp. All his friends were going, he said. 3 weeks in the mountains learning about astronomy and biology and physics. His eyes lit up as he described the telescopes they would use, the experiments they would conduct. The cost was printed in small letters at the bottom of the page. $2,400. I did not have $2,400. I did not have $200 that was not already spoken for. But I had something else. I had my 1972 Camaro, the car I had bought with every penny I saved, working summers during high school and college. That car was my pride before Sandra became my pride, before Derek became my pride. It was sitting in the garage covered with a tarp, waiting for the day I would have time to restore it properly. I sold it the next week to a collector from Ohio who drove up with a trailer and a cashier's check. I told Derek the camp was paid for, and I told him nothing else. He never knew what it cost me to watch that Camaro roll away on someone else's trailer. I cried in the garage after he went to bed, sitting in the empty space where my car used to be, and I never told anyone about that either. Sandra's condition waxed and waned over the years, like the moon going through its phases. Some months she felt almost normal. Other months she could barely get out of bed. Through it all, she loved Derek with a fierceness that made me fall in love with her all over again. She attended every school play, every parent-teacher conference, every soccer game, even when she had to rest for 2 days afterward. She was determined that her illness would not define our son's childhood. The worst came when Derek was 18, just weeks before he was supposed to start college. Sandra had been in the hospital for 3 days with a flare-up that affected her kidneys. I was sitting beside her bed, holding her hand, when the monitors started beeping in that way that makes your blood turn to ice. She died at 4:17 in the morning, with Derek and me holding her hands. The last thing she said was my name, and then Derek's name, and then she was gone. I did not know how to grieve and be a father at the same time. I did not know how to bury my wife and send my son to college in the same month. But I did both, because that is what fathers do. They keep going even when every step feels like walking through wet concrete. The life insurance helped with some of the medical debt, but not all of it. And Derek's tuition was due, and the mortgage was due, and the electricity bill was due. I went back to the bank and refinanced the house, extending the payments for another 15 years. I picked up extra work on weekends, fixing machinery for small businesses that could not afford professional repair services. Derek called me every Sunday from college. He told me about his classes, his friends, his professors. He was studying business administration, and he had ideas about starting his own company someday. I listened to every word, living vicariously through his excitement, remembering what it felt like to have the whole world ahead of me. On the day he graduated, I sat in the audience wearing the only suit I owned, the same suit I wore to Sandra's funeral. When they called his name and he walked across that stage, I wept openly and did not care who saw. He found me afterward in the crowd, and he hugged me tighter than he had hugged me since he was a little boy. He whispered in my ear that day. I remember his exact words. He said, "Dad, I will never forget everything you sacrificed for me." Never. I believed him. I had no reason not to believe him. A few years after graduation, Derek started dating a woman named Sloane. He told me about her on one of our Sunday calls, and I could hear something different in his voice. This one was special, he said. This one might be the one. The first time I met Sloane was at an upscale restaurant in the city, the kind of place where the menu does not have prices and the waiters wear nicer clothes than I own. Derek made the reservation, and I drove 2 hours to get there wearing my best button-down shirt and a tie that Sandra had given me years ago. Sloane was beautiful in a cold, polished way. She had the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. Her father owned a chain of car dealerships across 3 states. Her mother had never worked a day in her life. They lived in a world I had only seen in magazines. When I reached out to shake her hand, I noticed her eyes drop to my palm, I saw her register the calluses, the rough skin, the permanently stained creases that no amount of scrubbing could clean. Her handshake was brief, her smile even briefer. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself she was just nervous meeting her boyfriend's father. I told myself a lot of things that night because the alternative was too painful to consider. Derek spent most of dinner talking to Sloane, not to me. When he did address me, it was to explain things as if I would not understand the conversation otherwise. What is venture capital, Dad? What is market positioning, Dad? What is brand equity, Dad? He was not being cruel. He was just different. He had learned a new language in the years since college, and I did not speak it. Driving home that night, I replayed the dinner in my head. I remembered how Sloane had wrinkled her nose slightly when I mentioned my job at the mill. I remembered how Derek had quickly changed the subject when I started telling a story about his childhood. I remembered how they had exchanged a look just for a second when I mispronounced the name of the wine Derek had ordered. I told myself it did not matter. What mattered was that Derek was happy. What mattered was that he had found someone he loved. What mattered was that my son was building a life even if that life did not have much room for me. That is what I told myself. And for a while I almost believed it. The wedding was beautiful. I will give them that. Derek and Sloane got married 5 years ago in a ceremony that cost more than my house. Her parents paid for everything, which meant her parents controlled everything. The guest list, the venue, the seating arrangements, the music, the food. Every detail reflected their taste, their status, their vision of what a proper wedding should be. I was not asked for my opinion on any of it. I was not even asked to contribute financially, which was both a relief and an insult. When I offered to pay for the rehearsal dinner, a tradition I had always assumed fell to the groom's family. Sloane's mother smiled politely and said they had already made arrangements. On the day of the wedding, I arrived early wearing a new suit I had purchased for the occasion. It was the most expensive piece of clothing I had ever owned, and I still felt underdressed compared to the other guests. The ceremony was held at a country club I had driven past 100 times, but never imagined entering. The parking attendants looked at my truck like it was a farm animal that had wandered onto the golf course. I found my seat in the back of the ceremony area. Not the back row, technically, but close enough. The front rows were reserved for Sloane's family, for their friends, for people whose names I did not recognize but whose clothes screamed wealth. When Derek walked to the altar, I tried to catch his eye. He looked out at the crowd, smiling that practiced smile I had seen him develop over the years, and his gaze passed right over me. Maybe the sun was in his eyes. Maybe he was nervous, maybe he just did not see me. During the reception, I sat at table 14 with Sloane's great-aunt, a retired accountant named Bernard, and 4 other people I had never met. We were so far from the head table that I could barely see Derek and Sloane through the decorations. The father of the bride gave a toast. The mother of the bride gave a toast. The best man gave a toast. The maid of honor gave a toast. I waited for my turn for someone to hand me the microphone for the moment I had been rehearsing in my mind for weeks. That moment never came. After the reception, I found Derek near the exit shaking hands with departing guests. I waited in line like everyone else, and when I reached him, I hugged him and told him I was proud of him. He hugged me back, but it was quick, perfunctory. Over his shoulder, I saw Sloane watching us with an expression I could not read. I had written him a check for that night, a wedding gift that represented 3 months of my pension. I pressed it into his hand, and he glanced at the amount, then tucked it into his pocket without a word. I drove home in the dark, telling myself that weddings are chaotic, that Derek was overwhelmed, that things would be different once they settled into married life. Things were different. just not in the way I had hoped. A year after the wedding, Derek called to tell me they were moving. He had gotten a promotion, he said, and they had found a house in a better neighborhood. The kind of neighborhood where his career could really take off. The new house was 2 hours away from me in a gated community where the lawns were manicured by professional crews and the mailboxes were made of brick. When I offered to help them move, Derek said they had already hired a company that specialized in relocations for executives. Executives. My son was an executive now. I drove out to see the new house a few weeks after they moved in. Sloan answered the door and led me on a brief tour, pointing out features like she was a real estate agent showing a property to a potential buyer. Marble countertops, hardwood floors, a home theater in the basement, a pool in the backyard. Derek was not home. He was at a networking event, Sloan explained. He had a lot of those these days, important for his career. I asked her to have him call me when he got home. She said she would pass along the message. He did not call that night, or the next night. When I finally reached him 4 days later, he apologized, said things were crazy at work, promised we would catch up soon. Soon became his favorite word. We will visit soon, Dad. We will call soon, Dad. We will make plans soon, Dad. Soon was always just around the corner, a destination we never quite reached. The weekly phone calls became monthly phone calls. Then they became holiday phone calls. Then they became texts, brief and impersonal, the kind of messages you send to acquaintances rather than family. I told myself he was busy. I told myself success required sacrifice. I told myself that I had raised him to be ambitious, and this was just what ambition looked like. 2 years ago, Derek came to me with a business proposal. He wanted to open a craft brewery, one of those places where young professionals pay $12 for a glass of beer with a funny name. He had the concept, the location, the business plan. What he did not have was the capital. The banks had turned him down. The investors wanted too much equity. His father-in-law had apparently declined to help, though Derek did not go into details. He needed $150,000. He needed it from me. I did not have $150,000 in cash. But I had equity in my house, the house where I had raised him, the house where his mother had died. I had my retirement savings, the money I had set aside for the years when I could no longer work. I had the ability to borrow against my future to fund his present. Derek sat in my living room in the same chair he had sat in as a boy, and he looked me in the eyes and made me a promise. He said, "Dad, this is my dream. And when it comes true, you are going to be the first person I invite to celebrate with me." I signed the papers the next week. No formal loan agreement, no interest rate, no repayment schedule, just a check written from a father to a son, backed by nothing but love and trust. I watched him drive away with my future in his pocket, and I felt good about it. I felt like I was still his father, still needed, still part of his life. Looking back, I wonder if that was the last time I felt that way. I was sitting in my living room on a Tuesday afternoon, scrolling through Facebook on the tablet Derek had given me 2 Christmases ago, when I saw the photograph that changed everything. It was posted by Larry, a guy I knew from the neighborhood, who had moved to the city a few years back. Larry and I were not close. We had exchanged maybe 20 words in the past decade. But we were connected on social media the way you stay connected to people you will probably never see again, but cannot quite bring yourself to unfriend. Larry had posted a picture of himself holding a glass of beer, standing in what looked like a brand new industrial space with exposed brick walls and gleaming copper brewing equipment. The caption read, "Great night at the grand opening of Brewer's Legacy." Derek and his team really know how to throw a party. I stared at that picture for a long time. I looked at the date of the post. 10 days ago. I looked at the location tag. Brewer's Legacy Craft Brewing. I looked at the faces in the background, people I did not recognize, smiling and laughing and raising their glasses. My son had opened his brewery, the brewery I had helped fund, the brewery he had promised I would be the first to celebrate. And I had found out about it from Larry's Facebook post. I checked my email first. Nothing. I checked my text messages. Nothing. I checked my voicemail even though I had not received a voicemail in months. Nothing. Maybe the invitation got lost in the mail, I told myself. Maybe Derek had sent it to the wrong address. Maybe there had been some terrible misunderstanding. I sat with those maybes for almost an hour, my coffee growing cold on the table beside me, my chest growing tight with something I did not want to name. Finally, I made a decision. I would drive to Derek's house and ask him in person. I would give him the chance to explain. I would not jump to conclusions. I showered and shaved. I put on my best shirt, a blue button-down that Sandra had always said brought out my eyes. I dug through my closet until I found the tie I had worn to Derek's wedding, figuring that would remind him of happier times. On my way out the door, I remembered the bottle of wine I had been saving. A 1995 Chateau something or other that a customer had given me years ago when I had fixed his printing press on Christmas Eve. I did not know anything about wine, but I knew this one was special. I had been saving it for a special occasion. If this was not a special occasion, nothing was. The drive to Derek's house took 2 hours, same as always. I spent most of that time thinking about what I would say. I rehearsed different versions of the conversation in my head. Some were casual, some were confrontational. Some ended with us laughing about the mix-up over glasses of craft beer at his new brewery. By the time I pulled into his neighborhood, I had convinced myself there was a simple explanation. Maybe the event had been limited to investors only. Maybe the fire marshal had restricted attendance. Maybe Derek was planning a separate celebration just for family, and I had just been too impatient. I parked my truck on the street in front of their house, a stately colonial with columns flanking the front door and a lawn that looked like it belonged on a magazine cover. I could see movement through the windows. Someone was home. I walked up the path, my heart beating faster with each step. I climbed the porch stairs. I rang the doorbell. The door opened and there was Sloane. She was wearing yoga pants and a loose-fitting designer top, the kind of casual outfit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she had a green smoothie in one hand and an expression on her face that suggested I had interrupted something important. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked at me. I looked at her. I watched something flicker across her face, something that might have been surprise or might have been annoyance or might have been both. I found my voice first. "Hello, Sloane. Is Derek home? I wanted to ask him about the brewery opening. I saw online that it happened recently, and I was hoping to congratulate him." She did not invite me in. She did not move from the doorway. She just stood there sipping her smoothie, looking at me like I was a puzzle she had already solved and found uninteresting. Then she smiled. It was not a kind smile. "The opening was 10 days ago, Milton. Did Derek not tell you?" I felt the words hit me like a physical blow. My grip tightened on the bottle of wine. I took a breath before responding. No. No, he did not tell me. I thought maybe my invitation got lost or there was some confusion. Sloane shrugged a small, elegant gesture that somehow conveyed complete indifference. There was no confusion. We only invited people who were relevant to the business. Investors, partners, people in the industry. It was a professional event, not a family reunion. I stood there processing her words, trying to find the right response. Behind her, I could see the interior of their home, the expensive furniture, the art on the walls, the life my money had helped build. "Is Derek here? I would like to talk to him. He is in a meeting with some investors. Important people. I really cannot interrupt him for this." She glanced at the bottle of wine in my hand. Her expression shifted to something almost like pity but colder. "We only serve craft beverages at our events now. Local microbrews, artisanal spirits. You know how it is. Or maybe you do not. Anyway, you might want to give that to your friends at the bar or wherever." She stepped back and put her hand on the door. "I really have to go. I have a hot yoga class in 45 minutes and I need to center myself. Take care, Milton." The door closed in my face. I stood there on the porch, my feet frozen to the welcome mat, my hand still clutching a bottle of wine that nobody wanted. A neighbor across the street was getting into his car, and I could feel his curious gaze on my back. I wondered what he saw. An old man. A salesman who had failed to make a sale. Someone who did not belong. I do not know how long I stood there. It could have been 30 seconds. It could have been 5 minutes. Time had stopped making sense. Eventually, I turned around and walked back to my truck. I placed the bottle of wine carefully on the passenger seat. I started the engine. I drove away. I did not look back at the house. I could not. The drive home should have taken 2 hours. It took nearly 3. I missed my exit twice. I realized at some point that I had been driving in the wrong lane, and I had no memory of changing lanes. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. But I could not seem to make them relax. Somewhere around the halfway point, I had to pull over. The tears came without warning, blurring my vision until I could not see the road. I sat on the shoulder of the highway, with my hazard lights blinking, watching the cars stream past, wondering if any of those drivers knew what it felt like to have your heart ripped out by your own child. By the time I got home, the sun had set. I did not turn on the lights. I just sat in my living room in the darkness, staring at the wall where Sandra's portrait hung. Even in the dim light, I could see her smile. I could imagine her voice asking me what was wrong, telling me it would be okay. But it was not okay. And she was not there. And I was alone. I talked to her portrait that night. I know how that sounds. A crazy old man having conversations with a photograph, but Sandra had always been my sounding board, my confidant, the person who helped me make sense of the world. Losing her had not changed that need. It had just made it harder to fulfill. What did I do wrong? I asked her. Where did I fail him? The portrait did not answer. Portraits never do. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sloane's face, heard her words, felt the door closing between us. I replayed every moment of Derek's childhood, searching for the turning point, the place where everything had gone wrong. Had I worked too much? Had I not been present enough? Had I failed to teach him something essential about gratitude, about loyalty, about what it means to be a family? I thought about the $150,000. I thought about the years of double shifts. I thought about the Camaro I had sold, the vacations I had never taken, the retirement I had mortgaged for his dream. I thought about Derek's promise. You are going to be the first person I invite to celebrate with me. The first person. Not even the 10th person, apparently. Not even on the list. The next morning, I called Derek's phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called again. Same result. I called 5 more times over the next 3 hours, and every time I heard his recorded voice telling me to leave a message. I left one message. Just one. Son, I just want to talk. Please call me back. He did not call back. Not that day, not the next day, not the day after that. On the third day, I received an email, not a phone call, not a text. An email, the kind of communication you send to a colleague or a vendor, not your father. I read it at the kitchen table, my coffee going cold beside me. Dad, I understand you stopped by the house. I apologize for not reaching out sooner. The opening was a professional event strictly for investors, partners, and industry contacts. Sloan handled the guest list, and she made the final decisions based on what was best for the business. I hope you understand. This is business, not personal. I will try to visit when things calm down. Derek, I read that email 17 times. I counted. This is business, not personal. Not personal. 35 years of sacrifice, and it was not personal. Double shifts and sold dreams and mortgaged futures, and it was not personal. A promise made in my living room looking me in the eyes, and it was not personal. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time reading those words over and over, watching something inside me crack and crumble with each repetition. My son had not been forced to exclude me. He had not been overruled or outvoted or manipulated. He had made a choice. He had chosen Sloan's judgment over my presence. He had chosen business over family. He had chosen his new life over his old father. And he had done it with an email. I thought about Sandra and what she would say if she could see this. I thought about all the times she had defended Derek, insisted he was a good boy, deep down, promised that he would make us proud someday. I wondered if she would still say those things now. I wondered if she had been wrong about him all along. I wondered if I had been wrong too. That email broke something in me that I did not know could break. I had survived poverty. I had survived grief. I had survived decades of backbreaking labor and thankless sacrifice. But I was not sure I could survive being erased from my own son's life. For 2 weeks after the email, I did not leave the house. I stopped shaving. I stopped cooking proper meals. I survived on canned soup and crackers, eating mechanically, not tasting anything. The phone rang sometimes, but I did not answer. The mail piled up on the doormat, but I did not collect it. I sat in my chair by the window, watching the world continue without me, and I wondered if it would even notice when I was gone. That is the place I was in when my sister Meredith showed up. Meredith is 4 years younger than me, but she has always acted like the older sibling. She got divorced twice, raised her son Tommy on her own, and built a successful accounting practice from nothing. She does not take excuses from anyone, least of all me. She knocked on my door on a Thursday morning. When I did not answer, she knocked again. When I still did not answer, she started pounding with both fists and yelling that she would call the fire department to break down the door if I did not open it in the next 30 seconds. I opened the door. She took one look at me and pushed her way inside, not waiting for an invitation. She surveyed the dirty dishes, the closed curtains, the general decay of a man who had stopped caring about anything. Then she turned to me with that look she had perfected over decades of dealing with difficult clients and misbehaving children. "Milton, you look terrible. When was the last time you ate a real meal?" I did not answer. I could not remember. She spent the next hour cleaning my kitchen, throwing open the curtains, and brewing a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Then she sat me down at the table and told me I was going to talk whether I wanted to or not. So I talked. I told her about the Facebook post, about the drive to Derek's house, about Sloan's words and the door closing in my face, about the email that had called 35 years of fatherhood not personal. Meredith listened without interrupting. When I was finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that I have thought about every day since. "Milton, you spent 35 years being a father. Maybe it is time to remember who you were before that." I did not understand what she meant at first. Being Derek's father was all I had been for so long, that I had forgotten there was anything else. But Meredith remembered. She reminded me of the things I had buried under decades of responsibility. She reminded me that I used to race cars on the local circuit, that I had won trophies that were still packed away somewhere in my garage. She reminded me that I had once dreamed of opening my own shop, restoring classic vehicles, living surrounded by beautiful machines instead of industrial equipment. She reminded me that I had friends once, people who knew me as Milton, not as Derek's dad. "You gave up everything for that boy," she said. And maybe that was the right thing to do at the time. But he is not a boy anymore, and you are not dead yet. So the question is, what are you going to do with whatever time you have left? I did not have an answer. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt a tiny spark of curiosity, a whisper of possibility. Later that day, I got a phone call from Gerald. Gerald and I had been best friends in high school. We had raced cars together, chased girls together, dreamed impossible dreams together. Then life happened the way it always does, and we drifted apart. I had not spoken to him in years, but Meredith had tracked him down, given him my number, told him I needed a friend. "Milt," he said, using the nickname no one had used since Sandra died. "I heard you have been having a rough time. Why do not you come down to my place tonight? I own a little bar now. Good beer, good company, no judgment." "What do you say?" I said yes. I do not know why. Maybe because Meredith was still staring at me with that look that said she would drag me there herself if I refused. Gerald's bar was a small place in our old neighborhood, the kind of establishment where everybody knows your name and nobody cares about your problems because they have plenty of their own. The sign outside said "The Rusty Wrench," which made me smile because Gerald had always loved cars as much as I did. When I walked in, Gerald was behind the bar, older and grayer, but still recognizably himself. He grinned when he saw me and poured me a beer without asking what I wanted. There were other faces I recognized. Guys from the old days, the neighborhood guys, the men I had grown up with before I grew into someone else. They greeted me like no time had passed, like I had just stepped out for a moment and returned. Nobody asked about Derek. Nobody asked about my job or my house or my retirement account. They asked about cars, about the old races, about the time I had beaten a guy from Ohio who had an engine that should have been illegal, about the time Gerald's carburetor caught fire and I had put it out with my jacket. They asked about me, the me I used to be, the me I had forgotten. By the end of the night, I had laughed more than I had laughed in years. My cheeks hurt from smiling. And when Gerald mentioned that an old colleague of ours named Hank was looking for a partner on some kind of business venture, I found myself actually listening. "Hank," Gerald said. "You remember Hank? He worked with us at the mill before he got laid off back in 2008. Smart guy. Real smart. He went back to school, got into real estate, made a bundle. Now he is doing something with industrial properties, buying up old factories and turning them into something new. He was asking about you just last week. Me. Why would Hank ask about me?" Gerald shrugged. He said you were the smartest guy at that mill. Said you understood machines better than anyone he ever met. He thought maybe you could help him figure out which properties are worth buying. I did not know what to say. Nobody had called me smart in a long time. Nobody had asked for my help in even longer. "Maybe it is time you prove him right," Gerald said. "What have you got to lose?" I thought about that question on the drive home. What did I have to lose? My son had already shown me how much I meant to him. My wife was gone. My career was over. Maybe Gerald was right. Maybe it was time to try something new. Maybe it was time to find out who Milton could be without Derek. I met Hank at a coffee shop the following week. He looked different from the man I remembered. Back at the mill, he had been skinny and anxious, always worried about making quota, always stressed about money. Now he wore expensive clothes with easy confidence, drove a car that probably cost more than I made in 5 years, and had the calm demeanor of a man who had figured out how life worked. But when he shook my hand, he was still Hank. Still the guy who had borrowed $20 from me when his car broke down, who had crashed on my couch when his landlord evicted him, who had cried on my shoulder when his mother died. "Milton," he said. "Man, it is good to see you. I have been thinking about you for years." I told him I found that hard to believe. He had clearly moved on to bigger and better things. He shook his head. "You do not understand. You are the reason I am sitting here today. When I got laid off, you gave me a loan so I could pay my rent while I figured things out. You fixed my car for free when it broke down 3 times in 1 month. You believed in me when nobody else did. I never forgot that." I did not know what to say. Those small kindnesses, things I had done without thinking, had apparently meant more than I realized. Hank explained his current project. He was buying old industrial properties, the kind of buildings that had been abandoned when manufacturing left the region, and converting them into mixed-use spaces for small businesses. Breweries, restaurants, art studios, tech startups. The market was booming, and he had the capital to invest. What he lacked was expertise. He needed someone who understood industrial buildings from the inside out. Someone who could look at a derelict factory and see past the rust and decay to the potential underneath. Someone who had spent decades working with heavy machinery and knew what it took to maintain it. He needed me. I told him I was retired. I told him I did not know anything about real estate. I told him I was just an old mill worker with calloused hands and a high school education. He told me none of that mattered. What mattered was my knowledge, my experience, my ability to assess things that looked worthless and see their true value. He offered me a consulting fee. I told him I did not need the money. He said he was not asking. The first property we looked at together was an old machine shop on the outskirts of the city. The building had been empty for 15 years, and it showed. The roof leaked. The floors were cracked. Pigeons had made nests in the rafters. But I walked through that space and saw something else. I saw the quality of the original construction, the thickness of the walls, the strength of the support beams. I saw the electrical system outdated but easily upgraded. I saw the loading dock perfectly positioned for deliveries. I saw a building that had been built to last, waiting for someone to give it new purpose. I told Hank what I saw. I told him what repairs would be needed, what systems would need replacement, what the realistic costs would be. I drew on 35 years of experience knowledge I had accumulated, without realizing it, expertise I had never thought to value. Hank bought the building. 6 months later, it was home to a successful food hall with 8 small restaurants and a weekend farmers market. We bought another building after that, then another, then 3 more. I was not just consulting anymore. I was Hank's partner. He handled the finances and the negotiations. I handled the assessments and the renovations. Together, we made a good team. Within a year, our little company had transformed 6 properties. We had created spaces for dozens of small businesses. We had employed hundreds of construction workers and tradespeople. We had revitalized neighborhoods that had been written off as lost causes. And somewhere along the way, I had revitalized myself. The local newspaper heard about what we were doing. A reporter came to interview us, a young woman named Jessica, who seemed genuinely interested in our story. She asked about our backgrounds, our methods, our vision for the future. When the article came out, it focused on me. The headline read, "From mill worker to developer." How one man's expertise is reviving Pittsburgh's industrial heritage. There was a photo of me standing in front of one of our renovated buildings, my hands in my pockets, a slight smile on my face. I looked like someone who knew his worth. I looked like someone who had found his purpose. People started recognizing me. Not a lot of people, but some. Business owners would approach me at Gerald's bar asking for advice. Old colleagues would call to congratulate me. Strangers would send emails through our company website sharing their own stories of reinvention. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt valuable. Not because of what I had sacrificed, not because of who I had raised, but because of who I was and what I could do. The irony was not lost on me. I had spent my whole life supporting my son's dreams, and it was only when he abandoned me that I started pursuing my own. A year after Sloan closed that door in my face, I was sitting on the porch of my new home, watching the sun set over the hills. I had sold the old house a few months earlier. There were too many memories there, too many ghosts. Sandra in the kitchen, Derek in the backyard. The empty spaces where happiness used to live. My new place was smaller but better suited to this chapter of my life. It was close to Gerald's bar, close to Meredith's house, close to the office Hank and I had opened downtown. It had a porch where I could sit in the evenings and a garage where I could tinker with cars like I used to. I was happy. Not the delirious happiness of youth, but a quieter, steadier contentment. The happiness of a man who has survived the worst and found his way back to something like peace. That is when Derek called. I almost did not answer. I stared at his name on my phone screen feeling nothing, which was strange because I had felt so much for so long. But the anger had faded, the grief had faded. What remained was just a distant curiosity like looking at a photograph from someone else's life. I answered on the fourth ring. Dad. He sounded tired. He sounded defeated. He sounded like a man who had run out of options. He talked for 20 minutes without letting me get a word in. The brewery was failing. A major investor had pulled out after some kind of dispute. The suppliers were demanding payment. The landlord was threatening eviction. Sloan had moved out, had gone back to her parents, had told him he was a disappointment. He needed money. Of course he needed money. He always needed money. He also needed me. That was new. I could help him turn things around, he said. I could use my connections in the real estate world, my reputation in the business community. I could introduce him to investors, vouch for his character, save his dream. Please, Dad. I know I messed up. I know I should have invited you to the opening. I know I should have called more. But I need your help. You are my father. You have to help me. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. When he was finished, when he had run out of words and was waiting for my response, I took a deep breath. Derek, I love you. I will always love you. But I am not going to give you money. He started to protest, but I kept talking. Not because I do not have it. I have more money now than I have ever had. Not because I do not care about you. I care about you more than you will ever understand. But because giving you money would not help you. It would just delay the inevitable. I told him about the $150,000 he had never repaid. I told him about the Camaro I had sold for his summer camp. I told him about the double shifts and the mortgaged retirement and the years of sacrifice. And I told him about the door that closed in my face, about standing on his porch with a bottle of wine hoping to celebrate his success and being told I was not relevant. You made a choice that day, Derek. You chose your wife's judgment over your father's presence. You chose business over family. And I have spent the past year learning to live with that choice. Learning to build a life that does not depend on your approval or your gratitude. He was quiet. I could hear his breathing through the phone. "You need to learn the same thing," I continued. "You need to learn that you can survive failure. You need to learn that you do not need someone else to rescue you every time things get hard. You need to stand on your own feet the way I have always had to stand on mine." Dad. He sounded like he was crying. I could hear the tears in his voice. "I love you, son. But I cannot save you from this. Only you can save yourself." There was a long silence. Then he asked if we could meet, just to talk, he said. Just to see each other. No money, no expectations. Just a father and a son. I said yes. I told him to choose a place and a time. We met at a coffee shop in the city neutral territory. He looked older than I remembered, more worn. The confidence was gone, replaced by something fragile and uncertain. We talked for 3 hours. He told me about the business failures, the marriage failures, the realization that he had built his entire life on foundations that could not hold. He told me about Sloane's expectations, her constant criticism, her insistence that he become someone worthy of her family's approval. And he told me about the opening night, how he had wanted to invite me, how Sloane had convinced him it would be embarrassing that my presence would undermine the professional image they were trying to project, how he had convinced himself it was the right decision even as something inside him knew it was wrong. I did not yell at him. I did not lecture. I just listened the way I had listened to so many people over the past year. When he was finished, I told him my story. The months of despair after the door closed, the intervention from Meredith and Gerald, the partnership with Hank, the newspaper article, the new house. I told him that losing him had nearly destroyed me, but it had also forced me to become someone new, someone I liked better than the man I used to be. You will survive this, Derek. Not because I am going to save you, because you are going to save yourself. And when you do, you will be stronger than you have ever been. He did not say anything for a long time. We just sat there, father and son, surrounded by the noise of the coffee shop, wrapped in a silence that felt different from all the silences before. Finally, he nodded. His eyes were wet, but there was something new in them, something that looked like the beginning of understanding. I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had felt in years. I did not know if Derek would change. I did not know if our relationship would heal. I did not know what the future held. But I knew I had done everything I could. I had told the truth. I had set boundaries. I had offered love without enabling destruction. The rest was not up to me. I sat on my porch as the stars came out, thinking about Sandra, wondering what she would say if she could see me now. I think she would be proud. Not of what Derek had become, but of what I had become without him. I think she would tell me I had finally learned the lesson she had tried to teach me all those years ago. That loving someone does not mean sacrificing yourself for them. That you can give everything you have and still keep the most important thing, your dignity. I think she would smile and say, "It took you long enough, Milton." And I would agree with her. It did take me long enough. But I got there in the end. Now I want to ask you something. If you are standing in front of a closed door right now, a door that someone you love has slammed in your face, maybe it is not the end. Maybe it is the beginning of a path you never knew existed. Maybe the worst thing that happens to you can become the best thing that ever happened. If my story meant something to you, I would be grateful if you would share it with someone else who might need to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell me about a time when a closed door led you somewhere unexpected. Hit that like button if you believe that our worth does not depend on how others treat us. Subscribe to this channel so you do not miss the next story. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I hope you carry something from this with you. And I hope that whatever door is closing in your life right now, you find the courage to walk toward a new one. Take care of yourselves. Be kind to yourselves. And remember, it is never too late to become who you were always meant to be.